Tonight, we return to one case that entered the official record in February 1891 and has stayed there ever since, examined, debated, and still without a conviction or a definitive answer. One young woman, one investigation, one file that closed without resolution. This is the story of Frances Coles. The story begins in Whitechapel, London, in the winter of 1891. At the time, Whitechapel was one of the most densely packed districts in Britain, a tight maze of courts, tenements, common lodging houses, and railway arches in the East End, just north of the Thames and east of the city proper. The Whitechapel registration district counted around 77,000 registered residents. That number understated the transient population who filled the lodging houses night after night. The streets closest to this case, Thrall Street, Flower and Dean Street, and the covered passage known as Swallow Gardens, were typical of the neighborhood. Narrow, gaslit only on the main roads, dark in the courts and arches, filled with the noise of the railway above and the movement of people with nowhere else to go below. Charles Booth's survey of the East End in the late 1880s found that more than a third of the population lived in extreme poverty. Whitechapel and Spitalfields ranked among the worst. By February 1891, there were 233 registered common lodging houses in Whitechapel alone, offering roughly 8,500 beds a night at 4p each. Anyone without the 4p was turned out, whatever the hour or the weather. It was in this district, at about 2:15 in the morning on February 13th, that a police constable on his beat shone his lantern into a railway arch and found a woman lying in a pool of blood. Frances Coles was born on September 17, 1859, at 18 Crucifix Lane, Bermondsey, Surrey, in the parish of St Mary Magdalene. Her father, James William Coles, was a master bootmaker from Poulton, Somerset. Her mother, Mary Ann Carney, came from Ireland. The marriage joined an English artisan family with the Irish community that had settled in Bermondsey's working-class streets. Frances was the third of 4 children. Her older sisters were Mary Ann, born around 1852 to 53, and Selina Adelina, born October 25, 1855. Her younger brother James arrived on August 30th, 1862. The family later lived at 8 White's Court, Bermondsey, in a single room that also served as James William's workshop, a common arrangement for skilled artisans whose living and working space collapsed into one under economic pressure. By about 1873, when Frances was 13 or 14, the household had broken down. James William could no longer support the family and entered the St Mary Magdalene workhouse on Russell Street. Frances and her younger brother appear to have spent time there with him. That early contact with the workhouse system shaped the rest of her life. She continued to visit her father in workhouse institutions into adulthood. Around 1880, Frances moved from Bermondsey to the Whitechapel and Spitalfields area of the East End. She took work as a bottle stopper at Winfield, Horner and Company, wholesale druggists at 58 Minories. The job meant sealing glass medicine bottles by hand, hard on the knuckles and poorly paid. She continued to tell her father she still held that position long after she had left it. Every Friday, she crossed the Thames to visit him at the Bermondsey workhouse on Tanner Street, where he had become a permanent inmate. They attended church together on Sundays. These visits were confirmed at the inquest by family witnesses. To her father, she remained the respectable working daughter she presented herself to be. The reality was different. By the mid-1880s, Frances was working as a street prostitute in Whitechapel, Shoreditch, and Bow. She lived in common lodging houses on Thrall Street and Flower and Dean Street, streets already familiar to the British public from the Whitechapel murders of 1888. She was known on those streets as Carroty Nell from the colour of her hair. She also used the names Frances Coleman and Frances Hawkins in different lodging houses, a common practice among women moving between establishments. None of this was known to her father or her elder sister, Mary Ann. As late as 1890, she was still telling her father she worked at the chemist's in the Minories and lodged respectably on Richard Street, Commercial Road. By February 1891, she had admitted leaving the chemist's job, but kept up the appearance of legitimate work and decent lodgings. He had no reason to doubt her. If you're finding value in stories preserved this way, consider liking the video and subscribing. Now, back to the record. By early February 1891, Frances stayed when she could afford it at the lodging house at 8 Whites Row, Spitalfields, where the deputy was Sarah Fleming. A bed cost 4p a night, paid in advance. Her finances were at their lowest. She drank heavily and moved between houses as circumstances allowed or forced. On February 11th, she met James Thomas Sadler at the Princess Alice public house in Whitechapel. Sadler was a 53-year-old fireman and stoker on the merchant vessel SS Fez. He had just returned from a voyage with wages in his pocket. They had known each other intermittently for years. He had been a client before. They spent the 11th and into the 12th drinking together. Their movements on the 12th were later reconstructed in detail. Around 7 p.m., Frances entered the milliner's shop at 25 Nottingham Street and bought a black crepe hat for 2s. 6, money provided by Sadler. Later that evening in Thrall Street, Sadler was attacked by a woman in a red shawl and 2 male accomplices who robbed him of his remaining money. Frances was present and did not intervene. An argument followed. The couple separated. Frances returned to Spitalfield's chambers and fell asleep on a kitchen bench. Around midnight on the 13th, she was turned out of her lodging house because she could not pay for a bed. She had nothing. She went into the street. At about 1:45 in the morning, she was seen on Commercial Street by Ellen Kane, a fellow prostitute who knew her by sight and name. A man was with her, or rather, the man approached Kane first. He wore a flat-peaked workman's cheese-cutter cap. When Kane refused him, he struck her in the face, giving her a black eye, then turned to Frances. Kane warned her not to go with him. Frances went anyway. They walked towards the Minories. Ellen Kane was the last person known to have seen Frances Coles alive. At approximately 10 minutes past 2, Police Constable Ernest Thompson was walking his beat along Chambers Street. He had joined the Metropolitan Police only on December 29, 1890. This was among his first solo beats. He heard footsteps ahead of him, moving quickly towards Mansell Street. He turned his lantern into the railway arch at Swallow Gardens, the covered passage beneath the Great Eastern Railway viaduct between Chambers Street and Royal Mint Street. Frances Coles lay on the ground in a pool of blood. Thompson knelt beside her. One eye appeared to open and close in response to his presence. Metropolitan Police regulations required an officer who found an injured person to stay with them and summon help, rather than chase a fleeing figure. Thompson did not pursue the retreating footsteps. He blew his whistle. Colleagues arrived within minutes. Frances was taken to the London hospital. She did not survive. H Division of the Metropolitan Police, covering Whitechapel, opened the formal investigation on the morning of February 13th. The division had been under intense public and political pressure since the murders of 1888. Superintendent Thomas Arnold took an active supervisory role. Officers examined the arch by daylight. No weapon was found. Statements were taken from those known to have been nearby. Ellen Kane described the man in the cheese cutter cap and the direction she and Francis had walked. Inquiries at lodging houses quickly pointed to James Thomas Sadler. Multiple witnesses confirmed Francis had been with him in the 2 days before her death. After their argument, he had gone to the docks, tried to reboard the SS Fez, and been involved in an altercation. A coffeehouse waiter later identified him as the extremely drunk man who appeared at about 6 a.m. on the 13th, complaining of broken ribs. Sadler was arrested at the docks and taken to Leman Street Police Station. A hostile crowd gathered outside, intent on attacking the prisoner. Police had to disperse them by force and remove Sadler by a side entrance. The name Jack the Ripper was on every tongue. The assumption was immediate. The Ripper had returned and had now been caught. On February 16th, Sadler was formally charged with the willful murder of Francis Coles. Proceedings moved to Thames Police Court. The Attorney General's office supported the prosecution, an unusual step that reflected the institutional hope that Sadler might also be linked to the 1888 murders. A post-mortem was carried out at the London Hospital by Dr. George Baxter Phillips, divisional surgeon to H Division, and the same doctor who had examined several of the 1888 victims. Cause of death was hemorrhage from wounds to the throat. 3 deep, decisive cuts. Minor injuries to the back of the head were consistent with the victim having been thrown violently to the ground before the cutting. There was no abdominal mutilation. Phillips stated that the wounds did not, in his professional judgment, bear the characteristics of the 1888 murders. The finding was entered into the official record. The inquest opened on February 14th before Edwin Baxter, the experienced coroner who had already presided over several of the 1888 inquests. It ran through multiple sessions and concluded on February 27th. P.C. Thompson described finding the body, hearing the retreating footsteps, and remaining with the injured woman as regulations required. Ellen Kane placed the man in the cheese cutter cap with Francis at about 1:45. Sarah Fleming spoke about the lodging house. A seaman named Duncan Campbell testified that at about 10:30 a.m. on the 13th, he had bought a clasp knife with a metal handle from Sadler. The blade showed no staining. Family witnesses confirmed Francis's weekly visits to her father and the respectable account she had maintained. The jury returned a verdict of willful murder by some person or persons unknown. They also specifically commended the police for detaining Sadler, stating the officers had done their duty even though no conviction followed. At Thames Police Court, the prosecution continued in parallel. Sadler's defense rested on shipping records and witness testimony, placing him near the docks, on his drunken and injured state, and on the unstained knife sold after the murder. Dr. Phillips's opinion that the wounds showed no anatomical skill and a degree of control inconsistent with extreme drunkenness further weakened the case. On March 3, 1891, Inspector Henry Moore and Superintendent Arnold reported to Scotland Yard. The prosecution announced that no further evidence would be offered. The charge was dropped. Sadler was discharged. No other person was ever charged with the murder of Francis Coles. Newspapers that had named him as Jack the Ripper found themselves exposed. Sadler obtained financial compensation from at least one publication. The crowd that had gathered outside the police station had been the product of 3 years of accumulated fear. The discovery of a woman with her throat cut in a Whitechapel railway arch at 2 in the morning had triggered an immediate assumption that the pattern had resumed. When the assumption could not be proved, the fear remained. Francis Coles' funeral drew enormous crowds. Contemporary reports estimated 15,000 people appeared on a postponed date and around 20,000 at the actual ceremony at East London Cemetery, Grange Road, Plaistow. Most had never known her. They came because 3 years of unsolved murders had left a residue of collective fear that found an outlet at a funeral. She was buried a few yards from the grave of Elizabeth Stride. Francis Coles was entered as the final name on the Metropolitan Police Whitechapel murders file, an administrative category that had accumulated 11 names between 1888 and 1891. No conviction was ever obtained for any of them. After Sadler's discharge, the active investigation effectively ended. The man whose footsteps P.C. Thompson heard disappearing into Chamber Street was never identified. Thompson himself continued to serve in H Division. On December 1, 1900, near a coffee stall on Union Street, Commercial Road East, he intervened in a disturbance and was stabbed twice in the neck by a man named Barnett Abrahams. He died of his wounds at the age of 31, the same age Francis Coles had been. More than 3,000 officers attended his funeral procession through the East End streets, where, 9 years earlier, he had found her. The official case file, including Sadler's statement and the joint report of March 3, 1891, is held at the National Archives. The inquest verdict of willful murder by person or persons unknown has never been formally revisited. What the record does not contain is the identity of the man in the cheese cutter cap, any explanation of why Francis went with him after he had just struck Ellen Kane, or any verified account of the roughly 30 minutes between the Commercial Street encounter and Thompson's discovery in the arch. James William Coles remained an inmate of the Bermondsey workhouse. He had received his daughter every Friday and attended church with her on Sundays, accepting the account she gave of respectable employment and lodgings. The family learned the truth of her life only through the public record of her murder. Francis Coles was 31 years old. She had been born in Bermondsey in 1859, the daughter of a Somerset bootmaker and an Irish immigrant, had grown up in South London's working-class streets, worked sealing bottles, lived in the lodging houses of Flower and Dean and Thrall Streets, crossed the Thames each week to visit her father, and maintained for years a careful fiction of respectability. She was found in a railway arch at 2:15 on the morning of February 13, 1891, by a constable on his first solo beat. One eye appeared to open and close. Then she was gone. No arrest was ever made that stuck. The investigation was formally closed. The case remains open. The record remains incomplete. That is the documented story of Francis Coles. If this account has been useful, leave a comment with where you're listening from, and consider subscribing for more carefully reconstructed historical cases. Thank you for watching.